Hi, my name's Deborah, and I'm really glad to be here. It's so nice to be back. I'm sure it is for everyone. And, I came up and helped a little bit, help move things in, but I know there's been so many people up here working so hard. And I wanted to just take a moment, if you join me, to just give a bow of thanks to everyone who worked so hard to get us through this and bring us back together. And, I know for me, this, although I'm probably sporadic in my attendance, especially over the pandemic years, which is probably true of a lot of people. The White Heron Sangha is such a welcoming community, and it means a lot to me. And I know it does to everybody else. I was thinking about that, but how completely every time I show up, I'm welcome. And I think everybody feels that way. And it's not always that way in communities. So sometimes communities you have to kind of wiggle your way in or something, but here I never felt like that. I always felt welcome, and I really appreciate it. Tonight I want to tell you a story about a Japanese monk named Daito. He lived during the late 12th and early 13th century. And he's one in the lineage of Rinzai Zen. So in Japan, someone reminded me that if you're not in Zen, you don't know what Rinzai and Soto and all these things are. So in Japan, there are two main threads or lineages. And one is Soto and one is Rinzai. And being in Soto, I'm less knowledgeable about Rinzai, but my impression of Rinzai is it's a little more militant. It really emphasizes, and by militant, I mean it's very rigorous, it's the more rigorous in some sense. And it emphasizes sudden enlightenment. So there's a lot of emphasis on kensho, which is sudden insight and that sort of thing. Koan, a structured form of koan study is central to their practice. Whereas in Soto Zen, it used to be considered farmer Zen, it's a little more softer, more accessible or something like that. I like what Suzuki Roshi, I don't think he's the first to say this, but I heard it said that he said this, that, in Rinzai, like you get wet all at once, it happens all at once. And in Soto, it's like you're walking through a fog and you don't know when you got wet. You just suddenly, you understand, not suddenly. And I think that most people would say, who've been practicing Zen, would say both are true. You practice a lot and slowly it soaks in. And then you have moments where, makes sense. So I think probably both are true. Anyway, so, but Daito is a monk of the Rinzai lineage. And his real name is Shuho Myocho. And he was given the name Daito later by an emperor because he eventually became a great teacher and founded one of the greatest temples in Japan, which is Daitokuji in Kyoto. And so the emperor gave him this name, but he's most commonly known by that name. And I know there's only one book on him. It's hard to find stuff about him. They say that in Japan, he's one of the most known teachers. And yet in the West, he's hardly known at all. Did you get that already happened? The thing with recording and stuff?
Yes.
Okay, all right, because I know you said you were going to go in front of me and I didn't even notice. Amazing. You're so stealthy. Anyway, he's also thought of as kind of the second generation of Japanese Zen teachers. In the first generation, really all of them went to China to learn about Buddhism, to learn about Chan Buddhism, and then brought it back to Japan. And so this second generation that Daito is part of, they never went to China. They learned from a Japanese teacher. And so it's, in that process of development. And when I was thinking about this guy, I was thinking, we're kind of there, or maybe we're moving into a third generation. Because I think when I first went to San Francisco Zen Center, a lot of the students who'd been there longer actually went and spent a year or two in Japan to study. And then the next generation, people like Reb and I don't think Ed Brown ever went. I think they kind of didn't go, you know. I mean, Reb went to Japan, but he never went and spent like a year in a monastery or anything like that. So I think that we're kind of in that same place, that second generation or starting maybe third, something like that. Anyway, at the age of 10, he was sent by his family to a Tendai monastery. And Tendai is another form of Japanese Buddhism. And really, at the time when this was going on, Zen was just getting started, as I say. So I'm not even sure that they really had divided things by Rinzai and Soto at this point. So he started in a Tendai monastery. And when he got to be a teenager, he was dissatisfied with the teaching he was getting. And so he began to move around to some other teachers. And he eventually ended up in Kyoto and started to study with a teacher named Nampo. And this was when he was 22 years old. And they say within a couple of months of him arriving there and starting to study with Nampo, he achieved enlightenment and was given transmission by his teacher. And I always think 22, wow, that's pretty good. I mean, starting at 10, you know, is amazing. Of course, you get the Dalai Lama who started before he was born, right? So, you know, got a lot of catching up to do, right? Anyway, so his teacher gave him transmission, gave him a robe, which is traditional, but he asked a couple of things of him. He said, I don't want you to start teaching. I don't want you to take on any disciples. I want you to take at least 20 years to deepen and widen your understanding. And, you know, I've known this story for a long time, but when I was starting to get ready for this talk, I realized that there's a lot of tradition in Chinese Chan Buddhism of teachers taking time like that before they teach to ripen their teaching. There's also a great tradition of going, even though you've received transmission, to go to other teachers to get a wider sense of things. But anyway, his teachers told him this. And so Daito decided to go live under a bridge with the beggars in Kyoto. He went under I think the Gojo Bridge in Kyoto. And he lived there for 20 years as a beggar. And there were only rumors about him. Nobody saw him or knew what was going on or anything about him. And 20 years later, the then emperor, who had just kind of started to be really interested in Zen, had heard about this student, this disciple of Nampo that was living with the beggars, and he determined that he wanted to go find this guy. So the one thing he knew about him is that he loved this particular type of sweet melon, you know. So he thought he devised his plan. The emperor disguised himself as a fruit seller and took this basket of melons and went down under the bridge and went from beggar to beggar, saying, I will give you one of these wonderful sweet melons if you can take it with no hands. And of course, people just looked at him, the beggar's like, huh? What do you mean, you know? So eventually he comes across Daito. And in some places it says he had a feeling this was the guy because his eyes were so bright, you know. But anyway, not knowing who he is, he comes to this one guy and he says, I'll give you this wonderful sweet melon if you can take it with no hands. And Daito, without hesitation, says, I'll take it if you can give it to me with no hands. And the emperor knew immediately that this was the guy. And so, you know, the story, of course, goes on that he then leaves the beggars, and the emperor gives him a small temple, and he slowly becomes one of the most important teachers in Japan and very well renowned. And eventually the emperor builds him this huge temple, which is Daitokuji, and gives him this name of Daito. So this story, you know, is really important to me, not for any reason that maybe, you know, it's not a story that's used in a certain way by teachers in Zen or anything like this, but it's important to me personally. When I was, as a lot of you know, when I was younger, I lived for a number of years at the San Francisco Zen Center, and I lived both at Tassajara and San Francisco, and basically even in San Francisco lived a very monastic life, because I lived right in the building, worked in the building, et cetera, within, so all the time that I was there. And, I had gone, straight from high school to college, to university, to graduate school, and then right into Zen Center, right? So I'd been institutionalized my whole life, and, I'd had my share of fun and stuff, but there came a point where I didn't want to stay anymore at Zen Center, and there was a couple of reasons. One is I was just hungry for ordinary life. I was still young. I just was hungry for it. And the other was that I had never thought of practicing Buddhism in order to leave the world. I thought of practicing Buddhism in order to better understand my life and live my life more fully. And so when I looked at this monastic life at this point, especially I had been, at the time I was thinking of leaving, I'd been at Tassajara for 5 years, which is a long, long time to be completely away from everything. And it looked to me like we were living in a monastery to train monks, to train more monks, to train more monks, to train more, you know what I mean? Even though, yes, it was taught to other people and that sort of thing, but it didn't look like from that point in my life, it didn't look like the thing that I wanted to do. So I left. But right before I left, my teacher at the time, Baker Roshi, gave a talk on Daito. So when people would ask me, what are you going to go do? I'd say, I'm going to go live under the bridge with the beggars, That's what I'm going to go do. I'm going to go do that. And it was just a joke, But when I look back, that's what I did, And, I went through, like all of us, so many phases in our life. I sometimes think I've lived 1,000 lives. Do you know what I mean? There's like, you think about this point in your life and that point, they're all very different. But when I first left, I went to work at Chez Panisse. You guys know what Chez Panisse is? Yeah, some of you? Anyway, it's a fancy restaurant in Berkeley. And it was the 80s. So, everybody who worked at Chez Panisse was either an artist or a theater person or something, or they were going to be a big chef or something, So there was this whole world, and there was all these people that hung out there and ate there and that were in the theater or whatever world. There was this whole world, And part of that world was when we stayed open until 11:30. At 11:30 at night, we finish with the last customers. Somebody go down to the wine room, pull out a really great bottle of champagne, some really good Bordeaux wine. We'd all sit around, we'd drink, spend half the evening drinking. You know what I mean? The rest of the night drinking. Sometimes guests I remember one night we had these flamenco dancers. They stayed. They were the last ones to eat, and they stayed with us, and we all stayed up and did that. So part of what happened for me was I started doing drugs and got addicted. And one of the things that was so hard for me when I came back when I finally, because I did a lot of other things, like had a wonderful son, taught for 30 years in college, that wasn't my whole life, but that was part of it. When I came back to, decided I wanted to do formal practice again of some kind, some structured practice. That was the thing that bothered me. That was the thing I thought, how could I have had that monastic training and gone out and done that? How could I do that? Well, one day I was thinking about the story of Daito. And I had always, you're going to laugh at me. I told Mark this and he laughed when I told him. I had this idea of him like somebody like Rev Anderson. Some of you guys know who he is, right? He's kind of almost shines in some way, like especially when he was younger, very athletically fit and very handsome man and very, bright guy. And like him being under the bridge. And of course, there was something special about him, And I had never thought about it, but that's how the image I had in my head. And then one day I realized, no, this guy lived for 20 years with the bums. This guy probably had half his teeth missing. His clothes were raggedy. He probably smelled. He probably drank with all the guys. He probably stole to get some of his food. This guy was probably a guy that if he was walking down the sidewalk, you'd think of at least edging over the side a little bit, you might not want to share your seat on the bus with him, So this guy was he's enlightened, supposedly, okay? Whatever we think that he's enlightened. His teacher has said, yes, you get it. And yet he completely looked like someone we wouldn't think was that. And for me, it was like, oh, this person who became addicted and then recovered, this is the perfect Buddha I am. This is it, this is this Buddha. There is no other Buddha. That's it. This is the perfect perfection that I have. This is the moment I have. This is the life I have. This is, absolutely. And, for me, it just opened up this whole sense of how important it was for me or for all of us, I guess, to start right here and to see ourselves as a perfect Buddha, because perfect Buddha has good and bad, I mean, it's like, when Buddha saw the morning star, Shakyamuni Buddha saw the morning star, he said, I and the whole world awaken together. He didn't leave out the bums. He didn't leave out Putin or what's the guy who runs Wagner group, who does these horrible things. You guys don't know in Ukraine? Anyway, he's a guy who encourages his troops to do horrible, horrible things to people. He didn't leave out those people, and so it came home for me that I have to start here, accepting all those parts of me, all those parts of me, that anger that I don't like, or the self-centeredness that I don't like, that's perfect. We're never going to be beyond humanness, anywhere beyond humanness. I wrote these notes on my notes right here. They say, take a breath. I decided I wrote them all along here because I get talking and then I kind of go, oh, wait, where am I? So, one of the things I used to say when I was teaching college, they say you're supposed to model enthusiasm, but in Zen, or Buddhism, you should really model serenity, but I've had 30 years of teaching college. So it's like, get going on the enthusiasm and forget to slow down, actually saying and that kind of stuff. Okay, so one of the things that I love that Dogen said is those who regard mundane life as an obstacle to the Buddha Dharma know only that there is no Buddha Dharma in the mundane life. They do not yet know that there is no mundane life in the Buddha Dharma. And that's, for me, it's, to remember that this moment, whatever it is, and no matter how well or badly I'm reacting, is the Buddha Dharma, that is absolutely perfect. I mentioned Reb Anderson, and when I was at Tassajara, I think he'd probably been practicing for about 10 years at this point, and he was just beginning to take on some teaching responsibility. And one day when we were walking together, he said to me, he was feeling bad about his abilities. Hard to believe if you know Reb, but anyway, he said, there's two things that a teacher should be able to do. One is to be able to see the perfect Buddha that you can be. And the second is to be able to see the perfect Buddha that you are right now. And he said, I'm pretty good at the second one. And if you know Reb, that's true. He could tell you what you need to do to be better. He's really good. I mean, and I'm talking about the Reb I knew then, not now, but he said, I'm not so good at seeing the Buddha, how perfect a Buddha you are right now, and I think that's probably the hardest. In a way, I think we all can imagine, oh, someday I'll be that perfect Buddha. Someday I'll be enlightened. Someday, not today, not here, not with this person, this being, this body, these problems, but someday I'll do it. I don't think that day is ever going to come. I hate to say it, I think we have to do it right now. And a good friend of mine sometimes talks, and I probably have some of this wrong, about being in a glass house, and eventually you chip you know, you can see the world outside, but you're separated. You have boundaries, you know, you're separated. And eventually, you know, with practice, you chip a little hole, right? I'm sure this person thinks I don't listen to them, but I listen. You chip a little hole, and suddenly you can see that you're connected, you know, that there's not a boundary. But you forget what you're doing. You go walk around the house again, and there's walls, and, you know, so we all have these moments of realization. We all have them, you know, and I think long before you realize you're having them, you have them, you know. But part of practice is we start focusing, we start seeing that. And the hope is that eventually we can chip that little, and there's stories, of course, about people who see a piece of straw come off the back of a wagon, and all of a sudden they're complete, you know, the whole thing disappears and they're forever enlightened, right? But I haven't met many of those, you know, so I haven't met many that don't have, still have some limitations. So anyway, so starting right here, starting right where we are, and I was thinking a lot about all the different practices that we have. And someone was just talking about meta practice. You know, most of the practices that we have start with us and expand. You know, meta practice starts with wishing ourselves well, wishing ourselves happy and safe. And then you slowly take in more and more and expand it to everything. You know, Tonglen practice starts smaller, becomes larger. In Zen, you know, we start with just focusing on the breath, and they don't actually tell you this, but before you know it, you're doing Shikantaza, which is kind of concentrated awareness on everything, includes everything. And so I think, you know, our practice always says, start with yourself. You know, it always says starts with yourself. And even though we talk about no self, that no self is the small self. And when we say practice with yourself, you're connecting with that self that doesn't have limits, you know, that includes everything, everywhere. However, and some of you have probably, I gotta keep track of time. Some of you have probably heard this quote. Suzuki Roshi says, "You're perfect just as you are, but it doesn't mean you couldn't use a little improvement." Right? Have you heard him saying that? And so, you know, I was thinking about all the list we have, you know, the Eightfold Path, the Paramitras, the Brahma Viharas, the precepts, you know, all these things. And they're not talking about, they're talking about starting with yourself, but they're talking about these aspirations that we have of that Buddha we could be. You know, they're moving toward, they're where we're moving toward. You know, I was thinking it's like an arrow, you know, the arrow, we want the arrow to go there, but first you have to start here pulling back the string, you know. And so we do both. I mean, we're asked in Buddhism to do both, you know, to try to be right here, right now, and that's it. And at the same time, to be trying to be moving forward and to manifest, I guess, manifest this Buddha Dharma in a better way, in a more complete way or something. And I think, of course, both are very important. One of the things that came up for me, we have these in the Zen group, the Slow Zen Circle, we have atonement ceremonies every couple months. We don't have them every month because we're such a small group, but we have every couple months. And, you know, one of the precepts is, you know what the precepts is: don't kill, don't lie, don't steal, don't be selfish, don't be greedy. Wait, they're the same thing, aren't they? Don't talk badly of others, don't raise yourself above others, all these things. But always in these ceremonies, you know, there's almost always somebody says, I've got to work on not thinking bad thoughts about other people or criticizing other people or talking about other people. But almost always they follow right on top and say, but I'm much harder on myself, you know? And so one of the things, you know, when Buddha said, I and the whole world awaken together, it's because until we can, if you could see yourself as an enlightened being, if I could see, I should say me, all of us could see ourselves as perfect as we are, the whole world would become perfect. You know, the whole world would be Buddha. If we can see Buddha here, we can see Buddha everywhere, you know. And I don't think we can do that until we can do it for ourselves. And I want to just take, I want to bring up this one koan, which is from the Gateless Gate. And Gozo said to a student, an ox passes through the window. His head, horns, and 4 legs go through. But why can't the tail pass too? And I know these koans are kind of, you know, like if you're not used to them, they're, I know, what is talking about ox in a window? Well, the window is actually talking about this world of delusion, you know, and passing through to enlightenment, you know. So, you know, yes, the head goes through, the shoulders go through, shoulders are wide, the hips go through, everything, these big things go through, and that tail can't go through. And that's that one thing that you can't accept or that you hold on to, you know, that one thing. So turning it around, and, you know, we don't talk about love a lot in Buddhism, and we do sometimes, but, you know, that to love that thing as perfect, you know, as an aspect of our perfection, is so important. And that's really what that that koan is about. The other thing I was thinking about is, sorry, I had to go down to the college. I retired from the college. I worked down at Hancock College, and they have a saying that start here and go anywhere. You know that saying. And I think now, start here and include everything. You know, that's my new saying. Start here and include everything, my new version of it. So one of the things when Buddha was sitting under the Bodhi tree and Mara that came and tempted Buddha, you know, he brought his beautiful sisters to seduce him, and armies of demons to threaten him, all this stuff. But the last thing that he did to test Buddha was he said, you do not have the right to sit on the seat of enlightenment. I have the right to sit on the seat of enlightenment. I am the one who sits on the seat of enlightenment. And Buddha reached down his hand and touched the earth. And, you know, there's lots of ways to interpret it, but this is, you know, it's the same with us, to actually embrace the fact that we can know what Buddha is. That in fact, everything that we hear from teachers or from reading that we do or anything, the reason it means something to us is because it's in us anyway. You know, it is us. And so this calling to witness the earth, this calling to witness everything is this perfect Buddha, is this one thing. So so I think, you know, again, to start right here and to not just study about this, but to realize that the study is actually to study it directly, that the study is not just words in a book or words that a teacher gives us, but that we can know these things directly. And in fact, that when we, you know, Dogen said this, Suzuki Roshi said this, as soon as you sit on the cushion, you're enlightened, you know, and that's about, you know, all of these teachings came out, they weren't just learned from their teachers, they came out of people sitting on a cushion, meditating and paying attention and realizing them themselves, you know, that they're real and that they're not just something that somebody else has to give you, that they're inside of us, that we can find them, and that we have to give ourselves the right to claim, you know, to claim them and to recognize them in ourselves. So I'd say start with this perfect Buddha, include everything in your whole life, even the people you don't like and the parts of yourself you don't like or whatever. Include the entire Buddha Dharma, the good, the bad. And I want to end with a quote from Norman, where he sums up the precepts. Norman Fisher says, do good, avoid evil, realize your own lunacy, and pray for help. And I think that sums it up. So I don't know if anybody would have any questions or thoughts, any thoughts at all? Yeah. Oh, yeah.
There's a, well, so I was trying to decide how to frame this question.
Oh, it went off again. You can talk loud.
I can loud enough. Okay,
They can.
it's on. Oh, it's on again. It's on again. Okay. Goes. When you talk about this being as we are, right? You know, so it kind of has to be perfect because it's the only.
Yeah, maybe I can repeat the question as best I can so they can hear it. She was saying that now you can't, oh, I thought you didn't hear me for a second. Is it working? Go ahead, okay. So I think what you're saying is that really this is the only moment we have, so it really has to be perfect. Because what else, and that's true. And I think that's true. We have no other everything else is something we make up in our heads. Yeah, everything. And yet we all know how hard it is to be here now.